Return of the Mount Hua Sect, Chapter 161. No, even though you had to do it, this is too much. Faster, faster! Sasuke, we cannot speed up anymore. What nonsense, can't you see that? Baekchun's voice was filled with urgency and anger. Although they were climbing at a frantic pace, they couldn't overcome the initial difference from those who began the climb first. At this rate, the Wudang disciples would reach the goal first. If that happened, Chung Myung would have to deal with Wudang's disciples all by himself. No matter how inhumane he might be, there was no way he could deal with so many Wudang disciples. Not just Chung Myung, even Chung Myung's grandfather couldn't handle them. No, Chung Myung's grandfather shouldn't be brought up. But would it be possible for Chung Myung if he became an old grandfather? Well, that doesn't matter now. If you don't want to see your Sajet die, use every bit of energy you have and move. Let's move! Huh? Baekchun climbed the cliff even faster than before, with Yu Yisol following closely behind him. Even though they followed the same training schedule every day, they were the second-class disciples, while Yunjong and Jogul were the third-class disciples. There was still an unmatched difference in their stamina. Gul, be strong! We need to move faster! I might die! Stop whining! Yunjong clenched his teeth. Falling behind Baekchun didn't hurt his pride. Baekchun was like an idol to him. Yunjong was angry at himself because Chung Myung might be in danger, yet he couldn't move any faster to help him. How can I... Huh? At that moment, Yunjong noticed something strange. Some of the Wudang disciples climbing the cliff turned around and started to crawl towards the disciples of Mount Hua. What are they doing? Do you think they're coming to stop us? So strange, right? Tell me about it. It was weird. All that training to fight on the cliff seemed useless. I didn't think it'd help out here. Yunjong drew his sword, and so did Jogul. Would they deal with Wudang disciples if they were on flat land? If they were sane, they would never dare. Firstly, Yunjong couldn't find anyone younger than him among the Wudang disciples. What's more, along with the third-class disciples, there had to be some first- and second-class disciples mixed in. But they were currently on a cliff. Yunjong and Jogul were two people who had been on the receiving end of Chung Myung's sword on a cliff. You're digging your own grave. Your grave! Yunjong crawled towards the Wudang disciples that were approaching him. Jogul, who watched the scene from behind, mumbled, It's so annoying. Petty tricks! Ho Sanja bit his lip as he watched the weapons embedded in the floor flying at him. But just because it's a petty trick, that didn't mean that it would be easy to deal with. Why were they called divine weapons? They were regarded as such because these weapons could cut through swords and slice through bodies strengthened with ki. If those weapons couldn't be dodged. At that moment, Ho Sanja's eyes widened. The divine weapons. There was not even a shred of energy on the flying swords. All that could be seen were rusted lumps of scrap metal. What? Kang kang kang. Ho Sanja raised his sword and defended himself. The swords that attempted to kill him were scattered away in all directions. Some were even cut in half because they couldn't withstand Ho Sanja's attack. What is... Among the rotten swords, there was one flying around with formidable power. Ho Sanja, frightened at the perfect weapon, flipped over. If something like this had come at him from the start, he would have dealt with it more calmly. However, he had been dealing with rotten swords until now, when a perfectly preserved divine weapon assaulted him unexpectedly. As a result, he panicked. And... swish! Chung Myung didn't miss the opportunity and rushed in to attack Ho Sanja from the side. Gah! Kang! Ho Sanja raised his sword to block the attack, but he couldn't keep his body from losing balance and bouncing back. Ho Sanja, who was thrown off the cliff, bit his lips. You're playing tricks till the very end. Ho Sanja used his sword to stop himself from falling and then lightened his body to climb the cliff once again. Chung Myung clicked his tongue at the sight. Seems to be lacking strength. It would be nice if the man just fell down the cliff, but it didn't seem like this would end that easily. Meanwhile, Hall Sanja standing on the cliff again looked at the swords sprawled across the ground. Right, they are swords. Looking at them clearly now, they were all rusted and dyed red. They looked to be in bad form. But if you think about it, this was bound to happen. They were known as divine swords, but they were all weapons made of iron. It was only natural for them to rot away if left alone for 200 years in this damp cave. However, among the many decayed swords, a few looked fine. In other words, these were not just divine swords in name, but truly divine swords. Right, but it's worthless anyway. Hall Sanja could feel the laughter of Yaksun echoing in his ears. The main purpose of those that entered the sword tomb was to obtain these weapons. Only a few, like the Wudang and Shaolin sect, knew that Yaksun and the untraceable seizing sword were one and the same. Even that was only known because of one of Yaksun's disciples had accidentally spilled the information. So, when making the sword tomb, Yaksun must have anticipated that those coming here would be pursuing these weapons. Did Yaksun not realize that these swords would rot? No way. If he really wanted to pass these swords on to future generations, he would have stored them in a better environment. They wouldn't have been put in a cavern full of moisture like this. Was he simply mocking those who would come here later? He surely wasn't a good man either. Hall Sanja looked at the wooden box. It didn't matter what happened with the weapons here. The true purpose of his journey was different. And it was probably the same for Chung Myung. Chung Myung also didn't pay much attention to the fallen weapons. It seems like we have the same purpose. If you want to take those swords, I'll be happy to send you off with them. You're quite naughty. You don't want to be too greedy. Actually, I'm quite greedy as well. Chung Myung pointed his sword forward. As time passed, Chung Myung would be the one at a disadvantage. The other Wudang elders would also arrive if he couldn't defeat Hall Sanja quickly. There's no other option. It was an inescapable truth that one fist could not match up against 10 fists. Even the Heavenly Demon was unable to escape this fate. Chung Myung had no intention of testing whether it was true or not himself. Here I come. You seem to be in a hurry. Well, you're just too talkative. Chung Myung's sword moved softly in the air. Hall Sanja's mood quickly changed. He realized that Chung Myung's sword was unusual. Red flowers began to bloom from the tip of Chung Myung's sword. Hall Sanja lightly exhaled and exclaimed in shock. Plum Blossom Sword Technique! You've really restored the Plum Blossom Sword Technique? My, and you looked so uninterested until just a moment ago. It seems like Wudang knew that Mount Hua had lost its techniques. Of course, what Chung Myung was currently displaying wasn't the Plum Blossom Sword Technique, but the Seven Sages Sword. However, it didn't look like that in Hall Sanja's eyes. Red petals began to flutter. In a place where nothing should be able to bloom, red plum blossoms were growing in a cave where nothing could live. The plum blossoms bloomed in unison and flew towards Hall Sanja. Hall Sanja lowered his sword. He lowered his stance. This was the most stable form where the sword of Wudang began. The sword began with a heavy move. Circle. Hall Sanja drew a large circle in front of him with his sword. The circle was the source. It was the origin form which everything began. In the beginning, there was just one world, but the world then divided into yin and yang, creating all things. After all, the world began with yin and yang, and that yin and yang was Taiji. Huh! The circle drawn by Hall Sanja's sword split and divided into two halves, one white and the other black. Both energies began to swirl and shift. Taiji Wisdom Sword. The greatest martial arts technique of Wudang and the technique that truly defined the Wudang. The Taiji Wisdom Sword was fully displayed in Hall Sanja's hands. Although Mujin had previously used this technique against Chung Myung, it was only a clumsy attempt that failed to capture the true essence. That failure didn't deserve to be called the Taiji Wisdom Sword. However, the technique that Hall Sanja was unfolding now was precise in every way. Chung Myung's flying petals became entangled with the dazzling Taiji Wisdom Sword, soft and strong. The two opposing properties melted away. The petals were gently sucked in and crushed. To be able to make plum blossoms bloom at this age. If diplomacy didn't work, then defeating the child was the only option left. Killing intent rose in Heo Sanja's eyes. It's too early to be surprised. Chung Myung's sword swung once again. Mutual restraint. As Chung Myung had felt in the past, the reason why Mount Hua couldn't defeat Wudang wasn't that their martial arts were weak. The softness of the Wudang was the opposite of Mount Hua's sharpness. Swift and fast swords always revealed their weak points to the soft sword. But that is all. Just what is mutual restraint? Fire is extinguished by water, but a big enough fire can burn away any water. Anything can be overcome with a stronger force. Here it comes! The internal key, crouching inside the dungeon, responded to the will of Chung Myung. Impeccable and clear energy, the purest key moved from his dungeon and circulated through his body before moving to the sword's tip. Bloom. Blossoms bloomed again. The plum blossoms seemed to form a small forest as they bloomed again and again. This was no longer the Seven Sages' sword, 24-movement Plum Blossom Sword technique. In the past, the Jungnam sect tried to steal this technique, but they were unable to execute it. Plum blossoms bloomed, one after another, fluttering and propagating endlessly. For a moment, Heo Sanja was captivated by the sea of blossoms flying towards him. How is this sword? For the Wudang, the beginning of everything was the Taiji. Inducing Taiji in the sword was like placing the world in the sword. But the sword he saw now seemed to speak to him. The source of everything. The beginning of everything. It wasn't that. The world itself was like that. If the Taiji represented one path, then the dew on the tip of a leaf at dawn was also a path. All of that can be considered the path of life. Everything was nature. The plum blossoms were fluttering, but the logic of the world was contained within them. Huh? As the petals collided with the Taiji, a huge storm ravaged the surroundings. It was fortunate that no one had reached the top of the cliff yet. If anyone else had been present, they would have been shredded into bits by the collision of both sword techniques. Heo Sanja bounced back and grabbed his chest. It pierced my sword. His chest was stained with blood. There was not just one injury. His entire body seemed to have been sharply cut as blood spewed forth. What about him? Heo Sanja shook his head. He could see the figure of Chung Myung lying on the ground. Chung Myung struggled to get up. Apparently, he wasn't all great either. Damage? Was he damaged? No. Maybe he was pushed back lightly. Respect rose in Heo Sanja's heart. At this moment, Heo Sanja wasn't able to help but feel admiration for this child. At the same time, however, the sense of crisis rose. You have quite the dirty intentions. Chung Myung struggled to get up and spit on the floor, although it was more like blood than saliva. This should come to an end now. That's what I was hoping for. The two faced off and looked straight into the other's eyes. But there was something that both overlooked. This place had no sparring ground or training hall where they could battle and go all out. Nor was this a time that they could fight, just the two of them. Sahyung! The both of them took a deep breath and turned their heads. Hogong. Finally, Heo Sanja's Saje managed to come up the cliff. For a moment, Heo Sanja's eyes fluttered in emotion. Realizing what he had done, he screamed with nerves popping in his throat. Saje! That wooden box! Grab the wooden box! Hogong turned his head. His eyes clearly saw the wooden box placed on a rock in the center. Yes! Hogong quickly flew towards it without delay. At that moment, Chung Myung screamed, No! Chung Myung tried to throw himself at Hogong, but Heo Sanja quickly blocked the way. This is the end, you brat. No, that's not! Chung Myung's eyes clearly captured the sight of Hogong grabbing the wooden box. We're all ruined. Those assholes! Chapter 162. No, even though you had to do it, this is too much. Hogong trembled while holding the wooden box. This box holds the... He was also an elder of the Wudang sect. He wasn't some idiot that couldn't guess what this box contained after seeing the situation. The fact that he had finally gotten his hands on this prize made his heart flutter. At that moment, Ho Sanja retreated and stood next to Hogong. Come here. Yes. Ho Sanja received the wooden box and Hogong immediately drew his sword to guard the front. Even if Chung Myung rushed in now, they would have no problems. Strangely, Chung Myung just looked at the two elders with a disappointed expression. His face seemed to say that he had no intention of attacking them at all. Ho Sanja clasped the wooden box with a trembling hand and sighed. After all the trouble we went through. Although it was horrifically more difficult than he had anticipated, the thought of finally being successful in the end gave him strength. Of course, they still had work to do. They needed to secure a safe escape from this place, but nothing else seemed troublesome after achieving their main goal. I have to check it out. Ho Sanja grabbed the lid of the wooden box. Inside this box, he would find the soul vitality pill and how to make it. It would be a small achievement, befitting the work done here if the latter was inside, and an outstanding achievement if it was the former. Of course, it would be best if it was both. Ho Sanja gulped and opened the lid at once. Suddenly, his eyes widened and seemed as if they would pop out. Ho Sanja's body trembled. He shook so violently that even Hogong, who had his back to him, took a step back to check on his condition. And Hogong glanced and asked, Sahyung. Ho Sanja had such a rare and complex expression on his face that even Hogong, who had known him for decades, couldn't decipher. What is... Ho Sanja's trembling hand fumbled through the wooden box. The shaking of his hand continued to grow more intense. Why? Finally, he yelled. Why is it empty? Why is there nothing here? He turned the box upside down and shook it violently, desperately checking for anything he might have missed, but there was nothing that fell out. Ho Sanja wondered if the box had some secret compartment, so he kept inspecting it repeatedly. But alas, the box in his hands seemed completely ordinary. What else could he think? Ho Sanja's eyes quickly turned bloodshot. He was so angry that it felt like the blood vessels in his eyes were starting to burst. Yak-sun! You fucking bastard! Ho Sanja threw the wooden box to the floor and it shattered and splintered into pieces. Just in case, he even scanned the shattered remains to see if anything had come out, but not even a sheet of parchment could be found. It was literally just an empty box. Why did they come all the way here for an empty wooden box? Even the divine weapons were rusted and crumbled. So what the hell was this sword tomb even created for? Just then, right when Ho Sanja could not control his overflowing emotions. Hey! Chung Myung, who was frustrated, beat his chest. My God, you don't even know how to act your age. Even after being fooled by the tricks on the way here, you're still able to act like this? Are your eyes just for decoration or what? You people are supposed to let go of any desires and greed, yet you behave like this. Hogong tilted his head. What is he talking about? Desire, greed. The elders wondered just what he was suddenly talking about. Both were unable to understand, so Chung Myung scratched his head in frustration. That's why I was so anxious. What he felt while proceeding through the sword tomb. Yak-sun showed malice to those who entered the tomb rather than goodwill. A test? Yeah, right. Who the hell tests someone like this? Collapsing ceilings that crush others to death, blood-sucking bats, and even gangshi that hid in wait. It was more meaningful as an assessment if it was judging whether or not someone could even survive the damn test. What kind of test existed where any one mistake led to certain death? Chung Myung gnashed his teeth. So then, what about the wooden box? Wouldn't that wooden box also be rigged with a trap? Did you touch it knowing that something would come for us? You fucking dim-witted bastards! Ugh, I'm so angry that my stomach hurts! Tuck. As Chung Myung let loose a waterfall of curses at the two elders, the Wudang and Mount Hua disciples arrived on the scene one after another. They were determined to fight a grand war as soon as they finished climbing the cliff, but they were left breathless by the strange confrontation unfolding in front of them. What are you talking about? Hogong, who couldn't hold back, asked. As if waiting for that question, Chung Myung screamed, "If you have a head, then fucking think! There's nothing here!" Right. Then what's left now? At that moment, doo-doo-doo, everyone turned their heads toward the source of the sound. Rock. The rock that previously held the wooden box was shaking. No, it couldn't be. Hall Sanja, who was half delirious from anger, looked at the stone with a bewildered face. It was as if he had suddenly come to his senses and realized what was happening. The trembling grew bigger and bigger. What? No, why suddenly? After finally climbing the cliff, Baekchun immediately grasped the situation once he saw the wrecked wooden box and the shaking rock. And he exhaled. Even this is a trap. Ugh! Chung Myung rubbed his face with both hands. Right, this isn't the time for this. The soul vitality pill was definitely important, but surviving took priority. Chung Myung quickly looked around. There! Light was pouring in. That is... Huh? But at that moment, Chung Myung saw something. The tremor that began with the rock climbed the walls and reached a crack in the ceiling. At the same time, the entire sword tomb began to shake like an earthquake. Eh? What? Why? No way! No one could say anything else. What would happen was obvious to everyone, but they were shocked that it would really happen after making a fuss for so long. Chung Myung slowly looked up. Before he knew it, Mount Hua's disciples were standing side by side behind him and following his gaze to the top of the cave where the light was pouring in from. Finally, Chung Myung spoke. Sasuk! Yes. Do you think it's going to collapse? If my eyes aren't playing tricks, it will. Then what will happen to us? We're going to die. Right? Chung Myung smiled brightly. Then, as if a different personality took over him, he shouted, No! Even though you had to do it, this is too much! Yaksun, you crazy bastard! Yaksun was a fucking asshole. What sort of madman gave that idiot a gentle name like Immortal Presence to Yaksun? He should be a devil healer or something instead. Huh? Maybe a drug junkie. No, that doesn't sound right. Rumble. It was then. An ear-piercing sound echoed as the sword tomb violently shook. And crack, crack. Everyone heard it clearly as they bore witness to the sight. The ceiling began to crack, long and continuous. The cracks spread out like a spider's web. Chung Myung shouted as if he was going to explode in frustration. If I manage to get out of here, I'm going to kill all you fucking Wudang bastards. Damn it! Your eyes must only be for decoration. Even a 3-year-old wouldn't do such a foolish thing. Hall Sanja just lowered his head. It was incredibly shameful to be told all this by such a young man, but he couldn't object or refute it. He had lost sight of their teachings for a moment and took the bait. Because of that, everyone here would die. Wudang, what did you do? I don't know what the situation is, but you messed up. It's collapsing. We'll all die. What do you want me to do? Such an ugly sight. The people who had just climbed the cliff started to blame and curse the Wudang, completely forgetting that they were alive thanks to them. It seemed as though they had forgotten everything the Wudang had done for them before and were ready to attack. Of course, that didn't mean the Wudang were staying still. They were trying to solve the situation. But rumble. Sadly, there wasn't enough time. With a thunder-like roar, the cracked ceiling finally started to collapse. Oh my god, this is bad. Baekchun had these panicked thoughts. They were in a round cylindrical space. Everyone had climbed up here, and there was no way they could go back down to escape. Untraceable seizing sword, you crazy bastard! It was clear that Yaksun's intention was to kill everyone that gathered here from the very start. How malicious must a man be to have such evil intentions? Chung Myung! Don't worry, I'm Chung Myung. Chung Myung grabbed his sword and stared at the collapsing ceiling. Even if the sky collapses, there should be a hole to survive. If the ceiling collapses, surely... What? Chung Myung tilted his head. Sasuk! Huh? I don't see any holes. Baekchun's cheeks trembled. What do we do if there are none, you bastard? No, what can I do if there's no hole? Look at that! Rocks the size of a small garden were falling down. In the first place, nobody could make holes through such rocks with just their swords. Chung Myung is only a third-class disciple. There was no way he could do it. It was doubtful if even the Plum Blossom Sword Saint could do it. It's not like I'm the Heavenly Demon. How am I supposed to do that? Still, don't we have to do something? Sasuk, you know what? What? Everyone has to go through life anyway. Throw away your obsessions. Hey, you son of a bitch! Baekchun's voice was slowly changing. His growing desperation seemed to represent everyone's feelings. Despair began to creep onto their faces. Cut it down! At that moment, a thunderous voice resounded. Wudang's disciples, do your best to cut them down, right now! Yes! At Hall Sanja's signal, the Wudang disciples began to stand in a line. Taiji sword formation! Instinctively, Chung Myung felt like he was looking at something with amazing power. But, at least do something that makes sense here! Would there be anything impossible for a swordsman if these boulders could be cut with a sword? They could not only rule these lands, but even the central plains would be conquered. Think about it. Seriously. Chung Myung's face went stiff. It was foolish to jump into the sky while it was collapsing. This was the sword tomb. Everything here followed Yaksun's intentions. So did that evil healer really want to kill everyone who stepped foot in here? No, there must be a way, for sure. Think. Damn it! Since when did I start relying on my brain? That isn't my role at all. No, why is this place so crazy? Chung Myung's body shook as if he had been struck by lightning. This absurd place. It was a place full of deformities that lacked reason. Through the entrance, they fell into the depths of the earth. Then, the path narrowed and merged through many hardships until it eventually led here. Climb, and finally, Chung Myung's eyes lit up. A way out! Maybe that was the goal. No. Achievement? No. Whatever. There is one! Not the top. If this was really done by Yaksun, there was no way there would be a lackluster ending. Then what was left? Chung Myung's head snapped downward. All he saw was the ground. Jump off! Chung Myung's shout resounded so strongly that it seemed to threaten to bring down the cave around them. Chapter 163. No, even though you had to do it, this is too much. It's pouring. Formidable and dense rocks of amazing sizes began to pour down. It looked like an earthen tsunami was crashing down. Dust rose like clouds and plummeted as the rocks exploded downward. Jump off! It was the moment Chung Myung had shouted. As soon as Chung Myung spoke, the disciples of Mount Hua flew towards the floor without a moment's hesitation. Their bodies reacted before their minds even had time to process the action. It was truly a fantastic relationship of trust. But others didn't understand the situation. No! You bastards! Jump now! Don't you idiots understand words? Chung Myung kicked anyone he could and threw them down. What is... I'm going to die! Chung Myung grabbed the person next to him by the collar and threw him off the cliff without delay. You're insane! Everyone began to fly down the cliff at lightning speed. If someone, pung, speaks, pung, you should listen. Chung Myung swept over the cliff like a storm and kicked everyone he could. Those who saw his actions were frightened and threw themselves off the cliff. You! Chung Myung shouted at Heo Sanja. Jump down now! What are you doing? That's just rushing to death. I get it! Just jump down! Hearing those words, he looked down the cliff. Heo Sanja bit his lip upon the sight. Elder. The question was, how should it be done? But he didn't have time to think. Jump! Hurry! Yes! Seeing the disciples jumping one after another, Heo Sanja also flew down the cliff. This is beyond my imagination. If so, everything had to be left in the hands of fate. Chung Myung jumped in the air. When falling, it was a basic practice to lighten the body and utilize footwork techniques to reduce the force of the landing. But right now, Chung Myung had jumped and was shooting to the floor with as much power as possible. Damn it! I don't have time! The distant ceiling was collapsing, and all they could do now was buy some time for a while. But soon, the ground they stood on and everyone here would be buried under the falling rubble. Kung! As Chung Myung slammed into the ground, there was a roar as stone fragments burst into the air. Chung Myung, the path we came from was blocked. I knew it! That fucking bastard! Chung Myung gnashed his teeth. The place they had passed through to come here was already blocked by solid stone walls. Could they cut through it? That can't be done. There was no way the man that created this place would use weak stones. It was likely impossible to cut that stone wall down. Even if they did manage to cut through and enter the passage, there was no guarantee that it wouldn't collapse as well. Chung Myung decided to shelve the complicated thoughts and return to his original belief. Unless Yaksun had truly gone mad, there must be some way to survive this ordeal. Chung Myung, what should we do now? Floor! Chung Myung shouted without delay. To the floor! Right now! There has to be something on the floor. Floor? Don't ask! Just move! Chung Myung drew his sword and poked it into the floor. It was just like when the Wudang was searching for the entrance to the sword tomb. Those who saw his behavior all took out their weapons and thrust them into the floor. For now, they had to follow this man. Here! Here too! The sword won't go in! Here too! But this time, the issue wasn't that nobody could find it. The problem was that everyone was finding it. Chung Myung's face flushed. You bastards! Dig up everything below, now! All of a sudden, everyone was reflexively following Chung Myung's instructions. It was a situation where they could not foresee their lives in the next moment. With everyone living blindly, they had no choice but to follow the words of anyone that seemed to be able to see a solution, even if it was a young boy from Mount Hua who they didn't know. Everyone dug at the ground with bloodshot eyes. Those with weapons swung their weapons, and those without any used their hands to scrape at the hard floor. It didn't matter if their weapons were damaged or their nails ripped off. Their lives depended on clearing this floor. Dig! Dig faster, you brats! Straighten your back and work! Chung Myung was screaming and shouting as he violently swung his sword. Every time his sword slammed into the earth, a human-sized mound was thrown to the side, but the area they needed to cover was too wide. At that moment, the sword of Wudang penetrated the floor. Kwang! Right! Those useless bastards finally have a use! The Wudang's wide and unremitting sword was the best way to dig up the surroundings. They keep to themselves and always claim they're the best. With all the pills they've eaten, this is the least they could do. Seems like metal. There's a wide metal plate spread out. The sword doesn't work. Heo Sanja drew his sword and approached the one that shouted, Get out of the way. I will cut... Huh? Suddenly, Chung Myung rushed in and kicked Heo Sanja to the side. Heo Sanja, who was struck and blown to the side, rolled on the ground and looked at Chung Myung. Oh, wait. What the hell are you? You can't cut this, you crazy bastard. This will save our lives. Huh? Leaving Heo Sanja, who didn't understand the situation at all, Chung Myung raised his head and looked up. Wow! Before he knew it, the rocks fell faster and broke through the cliff. No! They could no longer avoid it. Chung Myung turned his head to the floor. There must be some way. There! Chung Myung roared and flung to the side. It's here! Although buried in soil and rubble, there was something subtly different from the other places. Chung Myung swung his sword lightning fast. Kwang! The soil was scattered in every direction and the floor was exposed. This! A door! Chung Myung's eyes shone. A door. It was the same format as their initial entry into the sword tomb. However, the first door they saw had symbols of swords pointing at one another, while this door had two swords stuck on the floor. Here! Cut it here, you idiot! Hwa Sanja rushed forward and swung his sword. Pang! The door was cut into dozens of pieces. At the same time, a hole opened. Chung Myung stretched his hand out without even bothering to look back. Thud. Huh? Baekchun looked at Chung Myung with surprised eyes. Go, Sasuk! Huh? Hey, you crazy! Chung Myung threw Baekchun into the hole, and the disciples of Mount Hua next to him were shoved into the hole in quick succession. Do it on your own if you don't want to die. However, there was no concern for others. Even though he had been helping the others until then, they had to do things for themselves now. Chung Myung realized the only way to get others to survive was to push them into panic. Run! Run! Now! At that moment, a strange sight was reflected in Chung Myung's eyes. In the distance, the Beggars Union was carrying and bringing the wounded forward. They were helping those that couldn't walk on their own, even though they couldn't guarantee their own lives here. Ugh, that's crazy! Chung Myung rushed ahead and grabbed Hong Dae-gwang by the collar. What are you doing, you beggar? There are injured people in here. If we leave them like this, they'll die. I'm going to die. Me? Seriously? How did you people even get in here? Chung Myung looked at the people from the Beggars Union who hadn't seemed to grasp the situation, caught them, and threw them into the hole. Watch the fucking situation and don't mess around! At last, after throwing everyone in the hole, Chung Myung's gaze landed above him. Ah, fuck! The rocks were crashing down as if they wanted him dead. Ah! Chung Myung screamed as he quickly moved. He felt a chilling wind rush to his head. He lay flat on the floor and began to run on all four limbs to the hole. People have 2 legs for walking and running, but when they use all 4 of their arms and legs together, the speed of such movement is truly terrifying. It was like a cockroach running at full speed. What are you doing, you hypocrite? Hurry! Hwa Sanja, who shoved the disciples into the hole, was guarding it for everyone and saw Chung Myung. Jump in! Right now! Damn it! Look up! Rocks were plummeting towards Hwa Sanja's head. Chung Myung flew off the ground and grabbed Hwa Sanja by the waist. He kicked the falling rock to generate force and jumped straight into the hole. It was done with such formidable speed. Chung Myung looked around. Due to the desperate situation above, Chung Myung hadn't noticed that the hole, which seemed so deep, was actually shallow enough for a person to land safely. Chung Myung banged his head on the ground, so he was groaning in pain. Yaksun, you bastard! This was definitely not the fault of Yaksun. This was Chung Myung's fault for not anticipating it. He grabbed his head and groaned a couple more times before jumping up to look around. The space seemed wide if one considered it wide, and narrow if considered narrow. All those who survived here gathered here. Is it all over? Chung Myung, are you alright? Am I alright? Not me. Us. I'm fine. Then Chung Myung saw. Chung Myung looked up with bloodshot eyes. Perhaps Yaksun planned to save anyone that managed to discover and enter the space. But I don't know about the other things, but this place is totally untested. Even Yaksun, who made the sword tomb, couldn't have tested this place. How could anyone be confident that this space would withstand the downpour of boulders? Chung Myung prayed that Yaksun was an unparalleled genius who perfectly managed to secure this place. And at the moment, that thought passed his mind. Kung, kung, kwang. The impact created by falling rocks swept through the space. A shock erupted as if huge cannons were exploding in front of him. The deafening sound sought to rupture their eardrums as their insides twisted uneasily. Those who couldn't handle it coughed blood and crouched to the floor. Screams rang in the surroundings, but the disciples of Mount Hua and the Wudang stood tall. Holding their breath, they observed the situation. But the situation wasn't good. Baekchun's face darkened. Chung Myung, it's collapsing. The metal against the ceiling began to shudder and bend. Although it wasn't broken by the collision, it seemed that it was too much for it to maintain its shape due to the successful impacts. It became clear after this place wasn't going to be able to withstand the shock that was coming. Ugh! Yaksun! You bastard! Why is this the only time you're stupid? If you're smart at the start, you should be smart at the end! At this rate, everyone would be pressed into flat pancakes. I'd rather take death directly. Chung Myung jumped up and stretched his hands out to the ceiling. Kong! Kong! Every time the ceiling was impacted, a shock ran through, making it seem like Chung Myung's spine was shattering. Yet, he had to hold on. If the metal wasn't enough to sustain this place, the people here would have to keep the ceiling from collapsing. Chung Myung utilized the internal key within his danjon and held the ceiling up. What are you bastards doing? Do you all want to die? Ho Sanja was the first to understand Chung Myung's actions. May Buddha watch after us. Ho Sanja hastily ran to assist. Standing in the center, he stretched out both arms while standing next to Chung Myung and supported the ceiling. Gathering all his strength, he pushed against the ceiling with his life on the line. Shortly after, everyone that could stand on their own 2 feet rushed in and supported the ceiling. If no one helped, then everyone would die. So they all had to work together to prevent the collapse. Use everything you can. Use all of your ki. If this falls, then we all die. Chung Myung clenched his teeth with madness filling his eyes. Die? Here? Don't make me laugh. I will? Kong. Not die here, you bastards! Kwang. 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 The rocks were falling in unison as the weight of the earth seemed to shock the dark room as if the world itself was collapsing from above. Chapter 164. No, even though you had to do it, this is too much. No. What does all this mean? Wei Lip-san, the leader of the Hua Sect, looked forward with a bewildered voice. Suddenly, there was a flood of foreign fighters, unlike anything he'd seen, pouring into Nanyang as Mount Hua's disciples ran out. In such a place, he couldn't wait on their return, especially with his position as sect leader. Wei Lip-san, who didn't know the situation, hurriedly led his disciples to the location where the warriors were gathered. When they finally traversed the mountain path and arrived at the sword tomb, they were met with the sight of many angry people. It's no use coming here now. The Wudang and the others already entered and blocked the entrance. Blocked the entrance? That bastard child went down and broke the entrance. I've never seen such a sick son of a bitch in my life. Sadly, the moment Wei Lip-san heard the words bastard and sick, he could guess who the last person that entered the place was. Before he could fully grasp the situation, the mountain began to vibrate and quake. What is this? It's collapsing. Get out of here right now. Now! Oh my God, what is happening? Those who couldn't give up their lingering regrets remained at the sword tomb's entrance, as well as those who planned to loot the ones that entered before were thrown into confusion. Everyone hurriedly retreated in panic. And rumble. A roar, as if the sky would collapse. The whole ground around the entrance began to sink. Oh, my... Those who couldn't give up their lingering regrets and remained at the sword tomb's entrance, as well as those who planned to loot the ones that entered before, were thrown into confusion. Then, what would have happened to those people below? They wouldn't survive. Even if they were martial artists, a human is only human. There are things that humans cannot handle. No matter how powerful or famous the ones that descended were, they were still men with flesh and blood. I can't believe it's all crumbling. Then, what about the divine weapons? Divine weapons, my ass. It's all over. Those who went inside are going to meet a pitiful end. As the realization that the divine weapons were lost settled in, many experienced a complex mix of disappointment as well as relief upon knowing that others wouldn't be able to get the weapons for themselves either. However, Wei Lipsan felt neither. No. He looked at the sword tomb with wide tearing eyes and collapsed on the ground. No way! This couldn't be the case. They shouldn't die in that tomb. No. I'm just starting to see the future of Mount Hua. Of course, Mount Hua had many disciples aside from the ones that came here. But Wei Lipsan knew. He knew that even if Mount Hua was a place that gave birth to many talented people, no one could substitute the ones that came here, especially Mount Hua's divine dragon. No one could replace Chung Myung because such a person could not be raised. How can this be? Wei Lipsan felt immense regret that he hadn't been able to stop them. No matter how many disciples came down from Mount Hua, Wei Lipsan knew that his position dictated that he followed orders, but he had overlooked the fact that they had little experience in the real world. I should have told them it was dangerous. Of course, there was no guarantee that they would stop even if he had told them, but at least he wouldn't hold as much regret. Wei Lipsan's eyes blurred as he thought of Chung Myung and spoke. Hey, Mount Hua's divine dragon. Didn't you say the time for the Hua Sect is starting? He had spoken as if he would carry the future of Mount Hua and the Hua Sect on his own shoulders. Father! Wei Lipsan didn't even wipe his tears and looked at Wei Soheng. I don't know if it's alright to say this now, but the probability of surviving there. Wei Lipsan shook his head with a wretched and sad face. They are only human. But we never know if we dig it up now. Soheng. Wei Lipsan let out a deep sigh. There was no stopping sadness. It was alright to mourn, but reality needed to be accepted. I understand how you feel, but stop and settle your mind. But Wei Soheng looked at the broken entrance of the sword tomb with regret. Of course, he also understood. There was no way the people inside could have survived. However, thinking about the disciples of Mount Hua who had traveled with him until now, he couldn't just turn a blind eye. Even if the heavens ignore them, Wei Soheng covered his eyes and sobbed. My God, they're all dead. That's more like it. If we can't get anything, then it's better if no one gets it. It's crazy that the Wudang and other sects people all died down there. It was bound to happen. Hearing the reactions of those behind him, Wei Soheng's face quickly contorted in anger. You... Leave it alone. But father, they are too arrogant. This is how Gang-ho is. Wei Lipsan had a bitter expression. Gang-ho is ruthless. Thousands of people rejoice the misfortune of others and slander them. Even here, there are people who are prepared to steal from and harm those who successfully emerged with divine weapons. No one would pray for the dead. If anyone had managed to escape the tomb with the divine weapons, another battle would have started here. No one here would have accepted the one that found the treasure as its rightful owner. Even if they managed to return home with the divine weapons, it would have thrown Gang-ho into a frenzy. It might be better that Nanyang experienced this tragedy if it meant that there was no new bloodbath in Gang-ho. But Wei Soheng couldn't stand it. Aren't you going too far? For a moment, everyone turned their eyes to him. People have died, and all you can do is crack jokes. Isn't this what a sore loser would say? What's with that bastard? Who knows? Must be a young kid who doesn't know the world. Be careful, brat, or you might die. Right when Wei Soheng was overflowing with emotions, Wei Lipsan sighed as he stepped forward and stood in front of his son. I am Wei Lipsan, the sect leader of Nanyang's Hua Sect. Hua Sect? Was there a place like that? Wei Lip-san ignored the reaction and spoke. Those who have nothing to gain here, please head home. The residents of Nanyang are anxious with so many powerful people flocking to this place. Who are you to tell us what to do? Especially with that little title of sect leader. Who's ever even heard of that sect? Wei Lip-san had spoken politely, but all that came back were insults. Wei Lip-san's face was distorted. He tried to be patient. Judging from the outside, Wei Lip-san seemed to have better control of his emotions compared to Wei So-heng. Finally, however, his anger erupted. I told you not to insult the dead and get the hell out of here. I'm already holding back my desire to tear apart your rotten mouths. Huh? Is he crazy? Someone he knows must have died inside. Wei Lip-san grabbed the sword on his waist. The least he could do was stop these men from insulting the dead in the sword tomb. That would be the greatest tribute he could offer the disciples of Mount Hua. But then, as he was about to yell, poke, poke, Wei So-heng poked his father in the back. Don't stop me. I've been patient enough. I cannot stand the words and actions of those impudent men any longer. Father, that's not it. There, look over there. Huh? Wei Lip-san turned his head and glanced where his son was pointing. What? Wei So-heng pointed to the middle of the broken entrance. What is that? It was then. Thud. Huh? Wei Lip-san's eyes widened in disbelief. Am I seeing it wrong? He must have been too excited about what was happening. Thud. Ah! Wei Lip-san's eyes grew as bright as a candle. This time, he knew that he wasn't wrong. Something was thudding and moving. Don't tell me. Just as he was about to jump down, woof, something pierced the floor with a dull sound. It didn't take long to realize that it was actually a human hand. Wiggle. The arm that had risen through the floor began to grope around and move slowly. And finally, the land and soil sprang up in all directions as someone's upper body popped up from below. Ugh, I almost died! It was a familiar voice, and he had a familiar face. It was a terribly familiar, irritating tone of voice. Chung Myung, young Taoist! Wei Lip-san jumped to the ground without delay, tears brimming around his eyes as he ran to Chung Myung. Chung Myung, who he believed had died, somehow survived and eventually escaped the sword tomb. Ugh, Yaksun, that fucking dog! Ugh! My sect leader Sahyung beat the shit out of that bastard for me! Wei Lip-san couldn't tell who he was talking to, but Chung Myung was pointing at the sky and cursing someone. And then another person's voice came from inside the hole. Move! Move, you bastard! Moving, I'm moving! Chung Myung crawled out with an annoyed expression, and then one after another, the disciples of Mount Hua crawled out. Ugh! I was this close to death! If I ever attempt to enter a cave or hole again, then I haven't learned my lesson. As soon as Mount Hua's disciples emerged like beggars, they collapsed to the ground and flopped down. It was a sight that easily conveyed how hard it was for them to get out of there. Unable to control his emotions, Wei Lip-san rushed to the disciples of Mount Hua and hugged them. The disciples of Mount Hua were bewildered by his actions and looked at the man that hugged them. Oh? What is wrong with this mister? Sect leader. Wei Lip-san spoke in a trembling voice. I am glad. I'm really glad. Everyone is really back. Chung Myung and Baekchun scratched their heads with awkward expressions. Well, it was nice to have someone who welcomed them back. Ah, Mount Hua's divine dragon. Me, pull me out. My leg is stuck. Ugh, that beggar, seriously. Chung Myung gritted his teeth and pulled up the struggling Hong Dae-gwang. Along with him, the Beggar Union disciples were hanging on to Hong Dae-gwang as they all began to pop out like sweet potatoes being pulled up on a farm. Ugh, come out separately. It's so heavy. Chung Myung was annoyed, but Hong Dae-gwang didn't have the energy to respond and just laid down after he was pulled out. Seriously, I thought I was going to die. For real. Starting with Mount Hua and the Beggars Union, those who survived began to come out one after another. After everyone else emerged, the Wudang came up last. Hall Sanja looked up at the sky with a slightly subtle expression. I never thought I'd get to see the sun again. He really thought he was going to die. If Chung Myung hadn't shown his wits at the end of the crisis, they really would have been dead. It was such a dire situation. But the crisis wasn't over yet. When he saw the people who hadn't entered the sword tomb begin to encircle the survivors, Hall Sanja frowned with a ferocious spirit rousing within him. And, no, those bastards. Having been pushed to the limit, his irritation was boiling over and about to explode as Chung Myung's eyes began to change. Chapter 165. No, even though you had to do it, this is too much. They aren't dead. Oh my, they came out alive from there. Wait, then what about the divine weapons? As soon as someone mentioned the words divine weapon, the atmosphere changed completely. At first, they were obviously amazed that so many people had survived that collapse. However, when they realized that they might have come back with the divine weapons, greed began to rise within them. What do we do? What do you mean? We have to take it somehow. Didn't everyone stay here for that in the first place? But there are people from Wudang and the Beggars Union. They aren't easy opponents. Look at them. Do you think they are in any condition to fight now? Greed was completely taking over their minds and overcoming reason. In particular, there was a saying that went, the greater the gain, the farther away the morality. And these people were like that. No one had come here with a good heart in the first place. Wasn't there only one reason they didn't give up the divine weapons despite not being able to enter the sword tomb? Because they were ready to kill and steal. In the first place, expeditions like these always ended like this. There was no law that said that the one who acquired it first would be its owner. The treasures released in the world were bound to go through a bloody battle. The greed in their eyes shone as they exchanged glances as if they were all thinking the same thing and surrounded the pit. The people who came out from the hole wouldn't be easy targets, so the first thing they had to do was to silence the strong. One of those who surrounded the people looked at them and spoke in a loud voice. Congratulations for making it out alive. Hall Sanja, was it? Hall Sanja's eyes twitched. And you are. There is no need for me to say it because it isn't important. Hong Dae-kwang was watching it and smiled. Dan Sa-hong, the lightning spear. I heard he was currently in Zhejiang, but it seemed like he had come here as well. Hall Sanja looked at Hong Dae-kwang and then looked at Dan Sa-hong. You're martial artist Dan. Dan Sa-hong frowned at it. He didn't want to make his name known to the Wudang sect, but he couldn't help it now. Branch Leader Hong knows my name. This is truly an honor. Can I ask you one thing? Sure. Where are the divine weapons? Hall Sanja said. Can't you understand despite seeing us like this? So you are saying that you barely made it out alive by giving up on the treasures. It was not a situation where we could hold on to anything. Hall Sanja spoke firmly. And there is nothing worth being called a divine weapon in there. After 200 years, only rusted and brittle things remained. Even if they were brought up, they wouldn't have been the weapons you expected them to be. Dan Sa-hong frowned. Then it is really unfortunate. But you see, Gangho is a ferocious land, and it is impossible to trust the words of others, right? Then what are you going to do? Dan Sa-hong smiled. Allow us to search the bodies of the Taoists. If you are really confident in your words, that wouldn't be a problem, right? You brat! Are we just going to let them do this? The answer wasn't from Hall Sanja, but the people around him. Letting their bodies get searched wasn't anything difficult. However, with the relationship the warriors had between them, it was unlikely that they would let them go even if they didn't find anything. And letting someone else get close enough to search your body was the same as handing your life to them. Letting them come close to search their bodies wasn't the same as a training match, but rather like an unfair match with a handicap. Right now, that was exactly what Dan Sa-hong wanted to do. And if we don't allow it... Taoist, you have to accept that the situation isn't that easy to get out of by simply refusing. Can you, who is this exhausted, handle all of us? Dan Sa-hong's eyes went cold. If you don't want to die, then give me everything you got from the inside. Then I will spare your life. If you don't give them up willingly, then you'll die. And I will take the things from your corpse. Does this bastard want to die? Think, and... Huh? Dan Sa-hong's eyes widened as he heard that. A young man who was sitting on the floor until then jumped up and started to run towards them. What is this? Dan Sa-hong was unable to understand it and tilted his head in confusion. Why on earth would a young man recklessly run into a place full of warriors? And there was something even weirder. And not a single person who had come up with him from the tomb was trying to stop him. Even Heo Sanja was looking in the opposite direction from that man with a sad face. What is he up to? It was when Dan Sa-hong was getting a little worried. The person running to them jumped up and landed right in front of Dan Sa-hong. Huh? Surprised, he took a step back. The face of the man in front of him wasn't relaxed yet and had unknown emotions, and his body was still covered in dust. However, the weird warmth that was oozing from the body seemed to be neutralizing the effect that his face had. The face that was filled with grumpiness, frustration, and irritation. Whew. What? If we don't want to die, then what? What should we do? Disciple. It isn't a situation that a mere disciple should intervene. Puck. In an instant, Dan Sa-hong lost consciousness, and his world turned black. And when his consciousness returned, he saw the blue sky. Sky? Why am I looking at the sky? In that moment, he began to feel tremendous pain in an area which a man should never feel pain. It was a pain that brought tears to his eyes. Dan Sa-hong fell down and shuddered. And then he realized that little one, no, that madman kicked him in the groin and blew him into the sky. Thud. The body which was rising to the sky fell straight down. The only difference was that the man who was standing tall before was now lying on the ground in pain. Ah, right. You want the divine weapon, right? No, such things don't matter now. Take me to a medical practitioner. I think my balls have exploded. Thud. Chung Myung pulled the man up by the collar. If you want the divine weapons, then you should have them. They're down there, so you can go look for them. Huh? Without another word, he threw the man into the hole. Ah! Dan Sa-hong's body flew through the air and landed right into the hole from where Chung Myung and the others had come out. There was a desperate scream, but it soon turned inaudible. Gulp. Everyone who saw it gulped, and Chung Myung looked at them and asked, "Who else here wants the divine weapons?" At the same time, shung, shung, the people present there all drew their weapons at once. But some people had been completely suppressed when they saw what had transpired, and consequently didn't dare face Chung Myung and retreated. And Heo Sanja said, "I swear in the name of Wudang, we didn't come out with anything. And down there, the divine weapons you thought were present there didn't exist. There were some that looked like them, but I don't think they would have survived the collapse. They are probably broken as well. I am sure there are still some people who want to get the weapons and might dig for them here. It may take years, but I am sure you will find something." Everyone held their breath at the cold voice. This wasn't something which could be taken lightly, since an elder of the Wudang sect was swearing on his name. Can we believe that? Are you saying that you won't believe the words of Wudang? Everyone went silent. If it had been a while ago, they wouldn't have considered the words at all. As you can see by looking at us right now, there is no place for us to hide such things. Or would you like us to take off our robes? Those who had regained their reasoning eventually agreed. Divine weapons. Regardless of whether they were swords or spears, they could be anything that had the form of a weapon. But no matter how much they looked, they couldn't see any weapons. The Wudang sect, who would have been the first to get their hands on it, were now holding their own swords. Furthermore, who else wants to check, huh? I'm a busy person, so come out quickly. That guy was scary. They had seen with their own eyes how he had thrown a man down the hole, so how could they go against him? Let's go back. I'm exhausted. Knowing that the situation was not optimal, they thought it would be beneficial to get out of the place rather than make that man throw them inside. It wasn't known if they could do something against all of the people who had come back from the sword tomb, but the chances were that they couldn't, so avoiding any kind of confrontation was better. The crowd began to slowly move back, and Chung Myung, who watched it, slightly gnawed his teeth. In the end, this is how Gangho is. He had deeply realized for quite a while that he couldn't expect anything else. Besides, if the men had any conscience, then Mount Hua wouldn't have turned out like this. Chung Myung spat on the floor and jumped back down. Standing among the Sahyongs of Mount Hua, he looked at Ho Sanja. Though they had gone through many things, there was no resentment in either of their eyes. Chung Myung didn't need to hold a grudge against the Wudang sect, and Ho Sanja had his life saved because of Chung Myung, so there was no reason for him to hold a grudge either. Young disciple. Yes? Thank you. Ho Sanja said. Thanks to you, I survived. Right. You did good too. Chung Myung glanced down and took a deep breath. They worked the hardest and didn't get anything. Ho Sanja looked up with a bitter face as if he had the same thoughts. We will head back to Wudang. In the end, all of this happened because of our greed. We couldn't understand what we had and went after something else because of our greed. So maybe this was to be expected. They were noble words. Have you considered the offer, young disciple? It will not happen. I'm a disciple of Mount Hua. And that will never change. Ho Sanja, who was looking at Chung Myung, nodded with a serious face. Right. I guess so. Maybe the young disciple is a much greater person than I thought. Only a hypocrite like you will say that. Hypocrite. Hypocrite. Seriously. Ho Sanja shook his head and then spoke in a cold tone. The Wudang sect will remember Mount Hua. I hope we never turn into enemies. His words were rather mild, but it was a warning. But Chung Myung didn't bother answering it. He was tired of speaking now. Then, the Wudang moved. After that, the rest of the people who had survived the sword tomb began to move with regrets. Rather than the people standing outside, it would have been easier for them to sort out their regretful feelings, because they saw that there was nothing in the sword tomb. And lastly, Mount Hua's divine dragon. We're so exhausted that we cannot head back to Loyang today. Let us stay at the Hwayong sect. Even if you're a beggar, aren't you being too shameless? Do this favor for us. It is because we might die on our way back. Chung Myung sighed. The Beggars' Union were the ones who took care of others in dire situations. It was difficult to dig all the way up, and yet they did, and they were second only to Wudang and Chung Myung. Who will refuse the people of the Beggars' Union? Let's go. We will serve you food and drinks as a celebration of new life. Oh, thank you, sect leader. All the Beggars' Union members smiled. Chung Myung let out a low sigh and looked at his Sahyongs. Baekchun approached him with a disappointed face. In the end, there was nothing there. All because of that damn bastard. Mount Hua Wudang, and even the Beggars Union. They had all played into the trap of Yaksun, who had died 200 years ago. Ugh. Chung Myung scratched his head. I feel like I'm going to go crazy. If that man had appeared in front of him, he had the mind to beat him for 3 days and nights. But Yaksun was dead, and there was no place for him to settle his anger. Chung Myung calmed down and spoke in dismay. Let's go. There's no point in having regrets. I'm pissed off, so let's go and drink right away. A disciple drinking? Then you won't drink? I will drink. Let's go. Chung Myung moved, and the other disciples of Mount Hua followed him with sighs. They should be content with the fact that they had learned something good, and the Mount Hua disciples, who had expectantly gone into the sword tomb, had no choice but to finish the test and return without results. All of them, even Chung Myung. That's what they all felt at that moment. They couldn't gain anything. Chapter 166. Still, I will walk together with you. Ya, you helpless bastard! Chung Myung flinched and looked ahead. He saw his Sahyung Chung Moon glare at him with a quivering beard. Come on! He keeps coming after me day after day! Chung Myung pouted. However, despite Chung Myung acting that way, his Sahyung didn't seem to be any less angry. What did I tell you? Well, there are so many things you nag me about, so I don't know what the answer is. You're really a brat. Chung Myung flinched and turned his head. From afar, his sages were looking at him as if they were gloating. When they saw that he was looking at them, they immediately turned their heads away. Those bastards! Do they want to die? Chung Myung grabbed his head and looked at his Sahyung with a resentful gaze. Again! Chung Myung trembled. Who was Chung Myung? He was the supreme disciple of Mount Hua and could even be called the future of Mount Hua. Of course, there were many who were jealous of him and tried to disparage him by referring to him as the disaster of Mount Hua or the reason for Mount Hua's downfall. But weren't those just the feelings of the incompetent ones? It wasn't just his Sahyungs and Sajes, but even his Sasuks would never touch him. But this one man, the only one his name didn't bother was his Sahyung. Didn't I tell you not to beat your Sajes? No, I didn't mean to. Chung Myung went silent. They're the ones who started it first. Are you saying that they went crazy and picked a fight with you first? I still have some common sense, so think before you speak at least. Huh? Why was he unable to speak back? Ya! Anger rose on the face of his Sahyung. Not just the Sajes. Even the Sajil are scared of you and avoid you. No, those worthless bastards. The first thing they do is pick a fight with me, and when they lose, they come to you telling all kinds of tales about me. Only after they lose are they scared of me. Shut up! Chung Myung pursed his lips. There was nothing wrong with what he said. Was it just once or twice that Chung Myung had disciplined the Sajes? Back then, when he had just started doing it, his Sahyung would be appreciative. But now, his Sahyung was saying that he had crossed the line. There really is no one in the world that I can trust. At that moment, Chung Myung decided that he would take revenge one day. His Sahyung Chung Moon let out a deep sigh. Follow me. Huh? I said follow me. Chung Moon led him up to the peak of the mountain. And all the way up, not a single word was exchanged between them. Soon after they climbed the peak, Chung Moon asked Chung Myung to come next to him, and they could see the beautiful sight of Mount Hua below. Is he trying to push me down? Still, I won't die. Chung Myung looked at the scene again with weird thoughts, and then finally, his Sahyung said, Chung Myung. Yes, Sahyung? What do you think Mount Hua is? Huh? What kind of nonsense are you saying all of a sudden? It's not like we're cultivators. But we are. We're Taoists, aren't we? Then let's change the words then. What do you think a sect is? That... Chung Myung tilted his head. Let's take Mount Hua as an example. Maybe a man who had seen the world decided that he couldn't adapt to the human world and came to a place looking for a few people with his weapon. And Mount Hua was created because such misfits had gathered in one place. So, to make this and that happen, they put a name for it as well. Did Mount Hua come from that? Chungmun looked at Chung Myung with trembling eyes. No? You can surely think of it that way. That seemed to be correct. Did he hit a sore spot? But that isn't all. Chungmun shook his head. Chung Myung. Yes, Sahyung. Man cannot live forever. That was something very obvious, but Chung Myung wasn't going to mention it. This was because he knew that there was a weird flow of ki in the words he had said. You are gifted with talent. If you look at the current Mount Hua, no, perhaps even looking back at the entire history of Mount Hua, there would have been no one as talented as you. Why are you suddenly praising me? Chung Myung twisted his body at the sudden praise. Put your hands down, Sahyung. I won't die even if you push. But that is all. What? No matter how strong you are, what difference would it make? In the end, there will be things you cannot achieve on your own and places you cannot reach alone. If the first ancestor of Mount Hua didn't build Mount Hua and lived alone, would the world have remembered him? Would his will and martial arts be passed down to the world? Chung Myung frowned. I know what you're trying to say, but I'm not aiming for that. I'm just going with the flow of the world, and I'll die when I die. I don't want to leave anything behind. It is because you don't have desire yet. Desire? Chungmun nodded. Someday, you will want to do it. The day when your sages and sajus and your descendants will inherit your will in martial arts. That is what makes us a martial arts sect. Living together isn't everything. What is more important than that is for our successors to carry on the will of their predecessors. Sounds difficult. Right. Maybe it is difficult for you, but at the same time, you cannot do whatever you want just because new things are difficult. Chung Myung nodded softly. He didn't quite understand what was being said, but somehow it felt like he had to nod. So take care of your sages a little more. In your opinion, each of the children are lacking, and even I might be lacking in your eyes. Not at all, Chung Myung said sternly. The sages are stupid, but I never thought that Sahyung was lacking. I said a good thing, right? Chungmun looked at Chung Myung and sighed deeply. Stop smiling. It'll make me feel affectionate towards you, you brat. It's good if you feel affectionate towards me. To Chung Myung, who smiled softly, Chungmun shook his head and said, Chung Myung, yes? Do you know what the scariest thing in the world is? Being hit on the calves? Regret, Chungmun said in a low voice. I am not afraid of being looked down on by children like you, but I am afraid that one day you will regret it. Your regrets will be many times deeper and heavier than that of others. So even if you don't understand my words now, engrave them into your mind. It will ease some of your burdens someday. So you're saying don't beat those brats? Yes, you brat. I get it. You've been nagging for so long. Chungmun turned his body and walked away. I'd rather read the sutras than nag at you. Sahyung, let's go together. He glanced back at Chung Myung, who was running after him. This child was born with too many things. It was a good thing, but it wasn't always a good thing. The other sages were bound to look like idiots to him, who was able to bring out the plum blossoms from the tip of his sword right after he grabbed the sword. How painful would it be to live alone in a world full of fools? It was the Sahyung's job to lead him correctly. But Sahyung, I think I understand what Sahyung means a little bit. Oh? So what you mean is I should follow Sahyung and make the sect follow me in the same way, right? Chungmun smiled. It is different, you brat. How did you get to that conclusion? This is so difficult. It wasn't easy, but one day Chung Myung will know what it means, despite it taking a long time. And when the time comes, the world will witness the true swordsman of Mount Hua. If this carefree child could understand the meaning of responsibility, then everything would fall into place. The world will closely watch as Mount Hua sweeps everything away. But, yes, Sahyung? It seems like Baekgong Sasuk has been avoiding you recently. Did something happen?
No. Well, nothing happened.
A fight?
No, not a fight. Well, maybe?
Oh, dear ancestors. What do I do with this child? You are fasting for 4 days from today.
Isn't that too much?
Shut up, you brat. Chung Myung grabbed Chung Myung by the hair and pulled him along with him. How can such a bastard exist?
Sahyung, it hurts! Sahyung!
Chung Myung and Chung Myung kept bickering the whole time they descended from the peak, and it was like the plum blossoms that were blooming behind them were smiling at their backs. Chung Myung got up. He quickly looked around and fell silent at the unfamiliar place. It was a dream. Chung Myung closed his eyes again.
I never had dreams in the past.
Chung Myung shook his head. A strange feeling rose when he thought of the vivid face of his Sahyung. But Chung Myung knew. The past was just the past. He was now in a new present. It was unknown why this happened to just Chung Myung, but he wasn't going to be stupid and let the present go just because of the memories of his past.
What are you trying to say, Sahyung? Why now?
Chung Myung shook his head and stood up. He was overthinking it. The dream was just a dream. Perhaps the fact that he didn't get anything in the sword tomb might be mentally tormenting him. So Chung Myung must have dreamt of that memory.
Damn it! I should have gotten my hands on that pill.
Chung Myung gnashed his teeth. It had been a few days, but the feeling still hadn't died. The best pill known to the world, the Soul Vitality pill, was necessary for Mount Hua, which had lost its ability to rise. So this was unfortunate. We can't create something that doesn't exist. After suffering for a long time, Chung Myung finally resigned himself to his fate and shook his head, filled with regrets. He couldn't get his hands on it, but now was the time to let go of the past and think about the future. And above all, today. Chung Myung opened the door and went out. In the main hall leading to the yard, his Sahyungs were packing up their bags and sitting down. Are you up? You slept a bit today. Is your body hurting?
Nah, nothing like that.
Chung Myung shook his head. Then I am glad. Baekchun got up from his seat. Today was the day they all leave for Mount Hua. However, Chung Myung was still unable to let go of his regrets and sighed as he looked up at the sky. If it is meant to happen, it will. If it isn't meant to happen, it will not.
No, at least say something in simple words. Why make it sound classy? Are you saying that the bastard didn't have a reason to give the bloody pill to me? I'm trying to save Mount Hua down here. How can you say that, huh?
This is all your luck. Chung Myung scratched his head.
What sins did I commit in my previous life?
No,
this is probably because I committed too many sins.
This is why his Sahyung had told him not to hit the sajes. Those sins were tormenting him now.
Phew.
Seeing Chung Myung sighing, Baekchun smiled. What huge regrets do you have? Let go of all you can let go of. Now we return to Mount Hua.
Right.
Chung Myung nodded and looked up at the sky again.
I had a hell of a time.
The weather was perfect for a long trip. Chapter 167. Still, I'll walk together with you.
You did well, Mount Hua's divine dragon.
You said you would take 1 day off and move, but how many days did you stay?
The food here is delicious, and the bed is comfortable, and the drinks... no, it isn't any of that. It is my body which didn't recover.
Chung Myung looked at Hong Dae-gwang with narrowed eyes.
How did the Beggars Union turn into this?
In the past, the Beggars Union were made of people who risked their lives for information. In the final battle, in terms of loss of power, it was Mount Hua who suffered the most damage. But in terms of dead disciples, the Beggars Union was the first. He thought that the Beggar Union would be strict and working hard, but this man looked so lazy.
No, was the Beggars Union always like this?
He didn't know it because people change on the battlefield.
Anyway, Mount Hua's Divine Dragon, are you going back to Mount Hua now?
We should be moving soon.
Really?
Hong Dae-kwang's eyes changed. He bowed to Chung Myung.
I, Hong Dae-kwang, the Luoyang branch leader of the Beggars Union, would like to thank Mount Hua for the help they have given me in the Sword Tomb incident. And the Beggars Union will never forget the grace shown to us.
This time, Chung Myung decided not to speak snarky things.
It was nothing.
The two of them bowed to each other and looked at each other with awkward faces. What was it? A feeling of camaraderie.
And now you better be careful.
Huh? Hong Dae-kwang spoke in a whisper.
Whether you like it or not, this incident will make your name known everywhere because everyone saw you act with their own eyes. After 2 years since the conference with the Jongnam sect, your reputation, which had faded a little, is going to spread again like wildfire. It isn't necessarily a good thing to get fame in Gangho. More and more people will start to turn envious of you, and more people will try to use that to get fame for themselves.
That's such an obvious fact, Chung Myung said. He had been through something like this before, and all those who came to him went back with their tails between their legs. He had received the title Plum Blossom Sword Saint only after defeating everyone who had attacked him.
I'm giving advice.
Hong Dae-kwang was furious when he saw Chung Myung nodding reluctantly. Well, he wasn't the Plum Blossom Sword Saint now, but Mount Hua's Divine Dragon.
All right, I believe you'll do well. And from now on, please send information about Mount Hua's feats to us regularly.
Chung Myung's eyes lit up. Oh? Sending information and people to anyone meant that the Beggars Union wanted to be in contact with them, that they wanted to continue this relationship and exchange information with Mount Hua. We have nothing to give, though.
We will decide that.
Hong Dae-kwang chuckled.
I plan to reinstate the branch in Huam Village. So, if you need information from the Beggars Union, please contact us through them.
So you're saying that you will take the information about Mount Hua from the Huam branch?
That is how we all help each other and live.
Chung Myung smiled. This wasn't a bad suggestion. Rather, it was what he was hoping for. One of the things that Mount Hua lacked right now was the flow of information. In fact, the information power that Mount Hua possessed was inferior compared to even medium-sized sects. Until recently, they had just lived on a mountain and only worried about money. So why would they care about how the world worked? Chung Myung nodded and said, in addition to that,
yes?
Those who come to the Huam branch have to be smart kids because there's a lot of information I want. And leave a couple of beggars in Nanyang for the Hwayong sect. Also, keep in contact constantly for information.
Let's do that then.
The decision was quick.
It isn't like we won't gain anything.
They didn't get what they were aiming for, but this wasn't worthless at all. After Mount Hua was kicked out of the 9 sects, this was the first time that Mount Hua was able to reconnect the path of information from the Beggars Union, which had been cut in the past. If Hyunjung found out about it, would he be in tears?
Anyway, thank you, Mount Hua's Divine Dragon.
Yes, you stay good too, though we probably won't meet each other again.
Maybe we will get to see each other.
Hong Dae-kwang left those words and waved his hand.
Wait!
Chung Myung grabbed Hong Dae-kwang, who was about to turn back.
Huh?
Don't forget to promise.
Promise?
To send that beggar to Mount Hua. Hong Dae-kwang's eyes trembled.
Sure, right. I didn't forget.
Don't think I will forget it if time passes. I won't forget even if I die. What did that beggar even do to this guy?
I will keep my promise. I am Hong Dae-kwang.
If you don't keep your promise, don't consider putting up a branch in Hwam.
I said I won't forget.
Hong Dae-kwang smiled, looking at the kid who was threatening him. But it was a forced smile because he knew that this child would never joke about such things. Well, until he left Nanyang, Hongdae-gwang was threatened about it. After doing their last task, the disciples of Mount Hua stood in front of the Hwayong sect. The Hwayong sect's Wei Soheng and Wei Lipsan were there to see them off with the disciples of the sect. "Thank you so much." "It was nothing," Baekchun responded. Baekchun and Wei Lipsan were already discussing how to operate the Hwayong sect from now on and how Mount Hua would support it. As Wei Lipsan was someone who considered Mount Hua to be his last resort, he felt grateful that they were initiating this relationship between them and the Beggars Union, and he even promised to help Wei Lipsan solve his troubles and support the sect as well. Wei Lipsan bowed. The disciples of Mount Hua also bowed their heads. "Young disciple Chung Myung." Wei Soheng looked at Chung Myung with a face of regret. "What?" It feels a bit unfortunate." "You're bound to feel that, but we'll keep seeing each other from now on." It was a nice way to put it, but it was worrisome too. "Can I become a disciple of the main sect later?" "No." Chung Myung cut short his words firmly. "You must be the leader of the Hwayong sect." "Right. But it is alright for you to come to the main sect as much as possible and practice. Mount Hua doesn't discriminate between the disciples. Jogul Sayong is also intending to descend Mount Hua one day to succeed his family." Disciple Jogul?" Wei Soheng looked at Jogul as if asking for confirmation, and Jogul waved his hand, feeling a bit embarrassed. I'm not at that level yet." "Anyway, you can do it." Wei Soheng's eyes turned bright. "So for now, help your father. You will have a lot of work to do for the coming days." "I will." As if his burdens had been lifted, he smiled and backed away. As the situation settled, Baekchun bid farewell to Wei Lipsan. "Then we need to leave." "You're going a long way, so you must need money." "It's fine." Chung Myung touched his stomach. Something was sticking out. "Because we are rich." Right. "Anyway, let's meet again. Look after your health." As the disciples of Mount Hua returned waving, the people of the Hwayong sect also waved their hands. "They're gone." "Yes, they are." It felt like the storm had gone and passed them. Wei Lipsan felt empty and smiled as he looked at the backs of the disciples of Mount Hua. Mount Hua will be different from before. No, it is already different. And one day, their names will spread all across the world along with the name of Mount Hua. I cannot be acting like this anymore. Let's go inside. There's a lot of work to do. Even 10 people will not be enough to do the task we were handed. "Yes, Father." The disciples of the Hwayong sect turned around. Their shoulders seemed to be full of confidence and pride which had never existed before. The inscription on the signboard that said, Hwayong sect, Mount Hua subsect, looked weirdly bright. The street looked a bit gloomy. All those who flocked to Nanyang had left, and the residents who were still bewildered by all that had happened finally felt at peace with the place going back to its quiet nature. In the end, we have to go back without getting anything. It isn't without anything. At Yunjong's words, Baekchun shook his head. We took care of the Hwayong sect, and we formed a relationship with the Beggars Union. In the meantime, we fought with Wudang and made our Mount Hua's name known. We cannot ask for more than this. You're right, Sasuk. But still, there was regret in their hearts. They wanted that soul vitality pill, but they couldn't get a single thing from the sword tomb. Yaksun, that fucking two-faced bastard! Chung Myung also kept grinding his teeth as if it bothered him. But what could they do? It was highly unlikely for the pill to fall from the sky just because they did some good deeds. They had to go back now. Baekchun began to walk faster. He thought that if they stayed any longer in Nanyang, they would start to regret it even more. At that time, Yu Yisol, who was silent, spoke. But, why did a person called Yaksun become the seizing sword? Yu Yisol looked at Chung Myung. You said before, the start of the tomb looked very much like something the untraceable seizing sword would do. Baekchun, who was silently listening, nodded and added, Now that I think about it, you did say something like that, Chung Myung. What was the reason? How can I know? It just felt like that to me. Baekchun shook his head. The answer to that came from Jogul. It must have been to hide his identity. Huh? Thinking about it, it becomes quite obvious that it was something that someone dealing with medicine should do. He must have been walking around into sects, defeating their best masters and taking away their swords. If it was known that Yaksun was the one who was doing it, it would have become a complete mess. That's the obvious answer. Baekchun frowned. There had to be some other reason, like something which couldn't be explained. No, it's not that. This time, Yunjong spoke. It was said that he was someone who stole the swords of people after their matches and never disclosed his identity. Right. Why did he do that? It didn't seem like he coveted them with pride or something. It was more like stealing it and throwing it into the sword tomb. Jogul frowned. Thinking about it, it did seem weird. Yaksun didn't need divine weapons. However, he took away the weapons with the other identity he created. In retrospect, all Yaksun did in his other name was nothing but nonsense. So why do all that? Why make the sword tomb at all? Maybe he hated things. Huh? Maybe there is no need for a reason. He simply hated things. Hated. Yaksun was a warrior. Baekchun tilted his head. Yusame, can you say it in detail? Yaksun basically had to be a practitioner. Yes. It would have been more accurate to call him a healer, but he was someone who did even more righteous deeds. He was famous in the Gangho for the pills he made, and he was someone who spent his whole life treating the sick and injured. Because he was that kind of person, I think he hated things that had to do with violence. The warriors who uselessly wielded their swords to kill people. Even if he treated those warriors, they would go to kill someone the next day. Do you think he did all this with such simple feelings? Then the sword tomb. Yu Yisor continued with a subtle expression. A warning, maybe, to the people in Gangho. If it wasn't for the disciples of Yaksun, no one would have ever known what his other identity was. No, wait. Yunjong tilted his head. Yaksun did have disciples, right? Then why didn't he pass down the teachings for the soul vitality pill to them? Was it not passed down to his disciples? I heard that Yaksun didn't teach them by choice. Maybe they weren't qualified. The more we think about it, the stranger he becomes. So according to this discussion, this was all a whim on the part of Yaksun. It was then Chung Myung, who was walking slowly, stopped. Everyone turned and looked at him. What is it, Chung Myung? Chung Myung muttered something, looking up at the distant sky as if he couldn't hear them. Yaksun, soul vitality pill, martial sects, untraceable seizing sword, healer, disciples, test, sect, muttering something as if he was possessed. Continue, leave, test, Gangho, then... Soon, his body trembled. It was as if he realized something in the possessed state, and he quickly turned around and started to walk in the opposite direction. Where are you going? As soon as Yunjong moved to catch Chung Myung, Baekchun stopped him. Shh. Huh? Let's follow him, silently. Yes. After a while, everyone began to carefully follow Chung Myung, who was walking while muttering something. Just what did you find out, you monster? An expectation, which couldn't be hidden, bloomed in Baekchun's eyes. Chapter 168. Still, I'll walk together with you. As if possessed, Chung Myung walked back to Nanyang. The direction he was heading in was towards where the sword tomb had collapsed. Walking neither fast nor slow, he arrived at the mountain and began to climb the path with a blank expression. Yaksun, untraceable seizing sword. Yaksun, untraceable seizing sword. Disciple. He was constantly muttering something.
Think about it.
Thinking wasn't a huge thing, but Chung Myung was the only one who could solve this riddle now. Chung Myung's mind was jumbled with countless clues in his mind.
What did I try to get?
The soul vitality pill and the method of making it.
Where did I hear it?
Sword tomb, the tomb of the man. It was all wrong from the start. Yaksun was the untraceable seizing sword, but the untraceable seizing sword wasn't Yaksun. It was his fault for not seeing that subtle difference. If Yaksun had been the untraceable seizing sword, he wouldn't have tried to hide that fact, and he wouldn't have made a sword tomb which screamed out his other identity to the world. So even if Yaksun wanted to leave traces, they would have never been in the sword tomb. As a result, the only thing they found inside the sword tomb were rusted swords, right? Then where are the traces of the pills of Yaksun?
The road to outside.
It was said that there were several trails on this mountain in the past, but at some point, it was said that those paths were abandoned due to the occurrence of natural disasters, and the only path which was left led people right to the place where the sword tomb was located. A vast and deep pit entered the eyes of Chung Myung as he climbed up the mountain. He stood there in front of the pit and looked around.
The sword tomb.
This was the sword tomb. Anyone who climbed the mountain would eventually reach this place.
Dao. No Dao.
Path. A path with no path. No one who walked on a path that was different from this would ever reach here, and only those who took the right path could come here. Did you realize something? At the words of Baekchun, who asked softly, Chung Myung shook his head. Baekchun felt startled at the burning eyes of Chung Myung. Sasuk. Yes.
What did those who found the sword tomb do?
What?
I asked, what did the ones who entered the sword tomb do?
That. It was a random question, but he had to answer it, because it was clear that Chung Myung had come here in a process of neatly organizing his thoughts. They went inside.
How?
No. What are you meaning to say? Of course, the entrance was open and we went in. Baekchun went silent. They opened the door and entered.
Entrance.
A word which can have several meanings. However, the entrance here meant one thing. A door with swords aimed at each other.
Right, as if we were entering a martial arts place.
Chung Myung frowned.
What came after it?
A long and narrow road. There was a trap in the middle. Jogul clapped his hands.
Right, it was training. Yes, training. Because training is like walking on a narrow path. Everyone starts on a wide road, but in the end, they cannot handle how the path turns narrow, and they start falling behind. Only those who overcome it can move to the next level. In the midst of going through obstacles.
Chung Myung nodded his head. Now it was becoming clearer. In other words, Baekchun cleared it. The sword tomb is placed in such a manner that it embodies the process of a person entering a martial arts sect and cultivating martial arts.
It has to be that.
Only then did Baekchun understand the bizarre things that had occurred inside the sword tomb. But the road splits halfway through.
It is the same with learning martial arts. Even if the entrance was the same, everyone chooses a different path according to their own inclinations. But what happens in the end?
The path merges into one again.
Countless streams of water finally join the bigger water body. Even if we go down different paths, in the end, we have no choice but to follow the one with the greatest will.
Baekchun groaned. Completion of martial arts.
Right.
The huge space where Chung Myung fought against the second group. The road which split into several had joined into a single path there. It represented the warriors who made different choices to grow, but were still moving towards a single goal.
What was before that?
Along Dark Cave, in Gangxi, Yunjong groaned.
The evil within. Right. It represented the darkness that comes over the heart before the completion of martial arts. Evil.
Then the cliff? After we went through the dark place, we climbed up. The answer didn't come from Chung Myung, but Baekchun. The path of immortality. Baekchun could now understand it all. The dazzling light that was coming from the ceiling onto the cliff was a sign that the cultivation of martial arts is done. In Taoism, it's like ascension, and for Buddhism, it is liberation. But there was still something unsolved. Then, what about the divine weapons in the empty wooden box? Chung Myung said, "There were none." Huh? From the entrance, since there were people fighting and killing each other, it meant that there was nothing ever placed in it. Learning martial arts in the first place has no meaning. The sword tomb wasn't a place where Yaksun was testing the people. It was a place that embodies his idea of martial arts and cultivation. Yu Yiso's words were the driving factor to him realizing this. Yaksun was a healer. There was no way a person who helped injured soldiers would make something to kill people. No, maybe it was the principle of cause and effect. The more he loved and cared for people, the more the hatred grew within him because of their actions. So he must have become a swordsman and decided to let the powerful people of his time know that their martial arts had no meaning, taking away their weapons, which they used for martial arts. Even with his lack of strength, he was able to defeat very strong people. But nothing changed. Right, because the obsession with martial arts that warriors have is beyond imagination. Yaksun wanted to let people know that their martial arts were hurting people, killing them. But no matter how hard he worked to get this message out to the world, in the end, nothing changed. Baekchun grabbed his shoulders as if a chill ran down. Terrifying tenacity and madness. To convey that one thing, he created this entire sword tomb. Just how tenacious was this Yaksun? Then you mean that there was nothing in this place from the start? Right. Everything was in vain. Now that they realized the truth behind the sword tomb, everyone sighed. But why are we here? To check it out? No. Chung Myung shook his head. I told you, Yaksun was not the untraceable seizing sword. This is the tomb he made for the other version of himself. It was true that he didn't consider himself a true swordsman, because that was the fake side of him. Compared to his role as a healer and the help he did for people, the other identity was fake. What will people do if they are unable to achieve their goals no matter how hard they try? They will try to find a new target again. Chung Myung looked up. Everyone couldn't take their eyes off the collapsing ceiling, and even Chung Myung was looking at the light which was pouring in from the sky the moment the cave began to collapse. The light being their means of hope. But those who had discovered the end looked at the bottom. At the bottom, you could live if you reached the bottom room before the collapse, and most warriors wouldn't have seen what was above them, because then it was just survival. People were doing their best to just live. Chung Myung continued. His words weren't for his Sahyongs. He just said all his thoughts out loud without trying to stop them. Then the enlightened ones, what about them? Will they go back? No. Chung Myung moved. No, they move ahead. His message was to the people who set the wrong goal from the start. The people who learn martial arts and hurt people with it. He wanted to say, if you are alive, then keep moving ahead. The place he was headed to was the mountain path which went over the pit. No one had gone there before. Thousands of people gathered here, but none of those who discovered the sword tomb had even tried to move around it. They didn't even find it strange, because their goal was right in front of their eyes. There were countless clues around. A land in the middle of the mountain with no trees or grass. To those driven by greed, this was a land made of gold, but this was actually just a dead land. Ah, and when the words dead land came out, everything became clear. As Chung Myung said, there were clues, and each clue was being given to them very generously. The desire and greed for the pill and the divine weapons were what blinded all the people. Even the disciples of Mount Hua had jumped in with their swords drawn as soon as they came here. And when the tomb collapsed, didn't they turn back with regrets, just like everyone else? For those who valued only the sword tomb, there was no meaning in this journey. Chung Myung proceeded to move as he was possessed. The place had now become a pit in the dead land. He walked past the place where everything collapsed, to another spot. He walked up to the overgrown bushes, which were right in front of the pit. What you wanted to say is this. The ascension of martial arts wasn't everything. Chung Myung walked, and he kept walking. Even if you lost the goal which you risked all your life to achieve, without despairing on what had happened, if you find out what lies beneath your feet,
it isn't too late. So keep moving forward with those 2 feet that work for you. Not for martial arts, but for life.
That was what Yaksun wanted to say. Chung Myung's steps turned serious. Chung Myung didn't agree with the thoughts of Yaksun, but he couldn't help but pay tribute to the formidable arrangement the man did by pouring his life into it. And they arrived at another wide open space. But unlike the first place, everything here looked to be in harmony. There was water flowing through the rocks, and the area was filled with lush green grass. There were naturally grown trees and animals freely running among them, and the blue sky behind it made the entire scene look amazing. It was a normal and natural place. But Chung Myung was sure that this was the place Yaksun chose, because it was the perfect contrast to the dead land behind. Those who do not know the meaning of Yaksun's work will not realize it even if they arrive here. Right, this is just a simple mountain. Chung Myung's gaze was fixed on one place from the start. On one side of this place, there was a crevice in the rock where water was flowing. That place was probably the water source of the mountain. Water seems weak, Chung Myung mumbled slowly. The thin, shallow water soon merges with other water sources and then into a river, and then finally into the sea. In doing so, it helps sustain countless lives. And that was Tao. And it was benevolence. If Yaksun was really trying to convey his own feelings, he would have had to overcome his pride to do so. The sword tomb was indeed concerning. Then the pride of Yaksun. Chung Myung mumbled, as if he was Yaksun. What I have accomplished will spread like water into the world and will become something that will save countless starving people. It was an absurd thought. But if the person who made all this was Yaksun, then he deserved to be appreciated. Chung Myung walked to the crevice from where the water came from. If he was thinking right, this was the place. If what Yaksun was trying to pass on to his descendants in the future was what Chung Myung was thinking of, what he was trying to convey was right here. Chung Myung pushed his hand into the crevice of the rock where the water was coming from. It was a narrow gap in which a human hand could barely enter. He pushed his hand in and began to search. As the water came, Chung Myung's body turned wet. This was a fountain, a source of life. If it is there at all, then it should be here in this place. No, it has to be here. Those who are too narrow-minded and consumed by their own desires cannot know. Those who do not know how futile martial arts was couldn't understand what Yaksun was trying to say. At the end of his life, Chung Myung had felt a deeper sense of emptiness than anyone. And despite that, he was trying his best to try and understand Yaksun, who was trying to say that people should move ahead. And here, right in here, it was then. Tak! Chung Myung's fingertips touched something. The feeling of the object he was touching. It was no rock. It was definitely metal. Chung Myung pushed his hand further inside. He could feel a cleanly cut metal inside. He used ki to pull out the lump of metal that he held onto. Rumble. Water gushed out, along with a square ingot-shaped metal that was pulled out from the cracks. Chung Myung couldn't breathe as he looked at the iron box he had pulled out. This box! His hands began to tremble. Even his sahyungs couldn't open their mouths and kept looking at Chung Myung as if they had turned into statues of stone. A metal box of the right shape which remained sealed despite 200 years passing. Looking at it, it was clear that the object was unusual. Chung Myung's fingertips touched the box. Click. Chung Myung clipped the lock and took a deep breath. With a trembling hand, he slowly began to open the box. Keek! The box made a creaking sound. Before his eyes could even check its contents, a smell wafted to his nose. Huh? Chung Myung looked at it with wide eyes. In that small box, there were 20-odd small pills and an old book. Gulp. His legs trembled. He checked the booklet title by narrowing his eyes, which were tearing up. Soul Vitality's secret formula. Soul Vitality. He was losing it. Found it! Ah! Crazy!
We found it! We found it!
Chung Myung shouted very loudly.
Ah! Yaksun, you bastard! I found it! I found it!
Chung Myung slowly moved back.
Sahyung! My sect leader Sahyung! Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! I did it!
He could see the face of his Chongmun Sahyung smiling brightly at him. Chapter 169. Still, I'll walk together with you.
Ah! I found it! I found it! The soul vitality pill! This is insane! The soul vitality pill was really here!
Baekchun rushed to Chung Myung, who had fallen on his butt, and quickly grabbed the box. Splash! Chung Myung had fallen into the water, but no one paid attention to him. With his eyes blank, he only looked at the box.
If it's a soul vitality secret formula, this must be the method and recipe, right, Sasuk?
Right, as if it could be something else. To think we'd eventually find this.
Ah, sect leader, we did it!
Shh. At that time, Yu Yi-sol signaled for them to be silent and whispered,
Sahyung, there may still be people around. Treasures evoke anger in others. No one can be allowed to know what we found.
Ah, right. Baekchun quickly closed his mouth and the box as well. He didn't feel the presence of anyone else, but he wanted to be extra certain.
What do we do now?
Right.
Shouldn't we take this to Mount Hua?
Right, I guess so. Not even Baekchun could hide his shock and confusion at this moment. Chung Myung had suddenly stridden up the mountain and pulled out the box of soul vitality pills out of such an unexpected place. Wouldn't anyone be in shock? Chung Myung, you brat, you did well. Huh? Chung Myung? Baekchun looked over to find Chung Myung half submerged in the water with bubbles leaking from his mouth. Shocked, Baekchun quickly rushed to his side. Hey, what are you doing?
Good.
Having barely regained consciousness, Chung Myung trembled and looked at Baekchun.
Your junior is dying. Your junior is dying over here and you're only focused on the pills?
Who could have imagined you would drown like that?
I'm not talking to you.
Chung Myung raised himself up with a groan. His clothes were all wet, but that didn't matter now.
Give it here.
Chung Myung took the box from Baekchun's hand. Then he took a deep breath as he carefully opened the box. Once again, an indescribable aroma penetrated the atmosphere.
This is absolutely genuine.
Usually, let alone fake pills, even the supreme pill of Mount Hua didn't have such a clear scent in the past. This isn't something that could be faked. Chung Myung took several deep breaths before looking again at the pill recipe book. Carefully, he took the book out and closed the box. After shoving the container into his sleeve, he began to read the book's contents and spoke aloud with a trembling voice.
To the person who passed.
Oh. Mount Hua's disciples all listened with the utmost excitement.
If you understand the meaning behind my arrangements and have reached this point, then you're entitled to follow my progress. My research and the pills developed should be used to save the many people of the world.
Oh. It is the real pill and recipe. Chung Myung closed the book. In addition, there were a few other messages along with the formula for several pills, including the soul vitality pill. The various achievements and medicinal research Yaksun had accomplished in life were included. But Yaksun would have never imagined that all of his hard work and achievements would fall into the hands of someone completely different from his hopes, despite all of his complex arrangements. Chung Myung smiled and snickered. Without realizing it, he had begun laughing uncontrollably. Chung Myung couldn't contain his laughter. He took out the box and put the book back into it before shoving it into his sleeve and tying it to his clothes. His chest was already bulging from the pilfered night lamps, making a strange clinking sound when he moved. But who cares? His heart was filled with unprecedented warmth.
I feel so good, I wouldn't even mind sharing a drink with the sect leader of the Jungnam sect. Right, have a drink. That's what life is about. What? Plum Blossom Sword? Ah, it's fine, it's fine. It isn't like you people can use it properly anyway, can you?
Chung Myung, now the pill. No, the soul vitality. Baekchun shook his head. He's completely lost it. But that feeling was understandable. Even Baekchun lost control of himself a moment ago. Oh my god, the soul vitality pill. They came all the way here to get this, but they never thought they would be able to get away with it. Despite his words, Baekchun was constantly observing the outline of the box on Chung Myung's bulging chest. Chung Myung said with a serious face,
But people should still be reasonable.
Huh? Chung Myung turned and slowly bowed toward the source from where the box was extracted. After bowing and paying his respects, he looked at the water source. This is no tomb. What is this? A temple?
No.
Chung Myung shook his head.
This is Yaksun's tomb.
Huh? Yaksun's body may have been buried somewhere else. Maybe there was no proper grave. Life would have been meaningless to Yaksun once he passed on his legacy and pill recipes. Perhaps he died alone in the depths of some unknown mountains, untouched by anyone. His body may not be buried here, but there was meaning that he had left behind. It wouldn't be strange to call this place his tomb. What truly mattered was his intention and will.
That's enough.
Chung Myung turned around without hesitation. Yaksun's techniques were there. However, there was no need for Chung Myung to continue his will. But Yunjung couldn't help himself from asking, can we take this to Mount Hua? I don't think this is what the deceased will want. Mount Hua is a martial sect. However, Yaksun didn't want the pill to fall into the hands of such a sect. He hoped that someone, following his will, would receive his legacy. However, Chung Myung bluntly answered,
I don't care.
What?
Yaksun took a gamble. It's irresponsible to expect the person that finds his legacy would carry on his will just because he made some arrangements. Still, if Yaksun wanted his will to be continued, he should have given it to one of his disciples who could have carried it on, rather than leave it around like this.
Chung Myung shut his mouth. Someday, you will want to do it. The day when your sages and sajas and your descendants will inherit your will in martial arts. That was how martial sects were. Living together wasn't everything. What was more important was for the will to be carried on. Chung Myung closed his eyes.
This is what you meant, Sahyung.
Last night's dream. That must have been what the dream was relaying to him.
Were you so worried about this wicked saje of yours?
Chung Myung bit his lip. Chung Myung.
It's nothing.
Chung Myung stopped the tears gathering in his eyes to keep the Sahyungs from seeing and continued in a lowered voice.
I'll tell you this. Even if you don't believe it, the ability may be lacking. But if people continue to carry on my will from generation to generation, then one day there will be a person that can fully connect to that will and respond with the proper ability. That is what a sect is. That.
Chung Myung turned his head and looked at the rock.
Yaksun didn't trust those who would carry on his will. He must have wanted a genius that could fully capture his abilities and will in the same way Yaksun could. That's why he did this. But it wasn't the right way.
Those who are alone have no choice but look down on others. In the eyes of a genius like Yaksun, everyone in the world seemed to be lacking. He believed that those around him couldn't show his work's worth and that only a true genius like himself could inherit his legacy, just like Chung Myung once believed. However, you were wrong. In the past, Chung Myung was wrong. No, rather than being wrong, he simply didn't know. One day, those pitiful people will become precious to you. Chung Myung clenched his fist.
Now I know, Sahyung.
Huh? Me? Chung Myung had a sour expression as he looked at Yunjung, who was pointing at himself.
No, I don't think I know it yet.
Anyway, this was something that Chung Myung couldn't do alone. If his Sahyungs hadn't spoken with him and worked together, Chung Myung would have headed back to Mount Hua without ever realizing anything. Those weak people supported Chung Myung. Right, this. Chung Myung opened his mouth with a slightly awkward tone.
You all did well. Oh?
Have you lost it? Did he go crazy? Why is he acting so out of character?
He must want that pill. Ugh, these bastards.
Chung Myung closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Who could he blame? It was all because of Chung Myung. Chung Myung looked at the rock and thought of Yaksun's will.
Maybe you made the best choice too. Who knows whether it was right or wrong? Because I don't know everything either.
But still, I will walk together with you. I will no longer walk alone. I will no longer solve things on my own. Now Chung Myung had people who would carry on his will and fulfill that will alongside him. Right, that's a martial sect. That is Mount Hua. Yaksun's will shall be severed here. What Yaksun tried to leave behind in the world would no longer have meaning. His will merely led to Chung Myung, and Chung Myung would not follow Yaksun's will. However, Chung Myung was different. His will would be continued. As long as Mount Hua existed, and as long as the will of Mount Hua lived on. Even if he died or 100 years passed, Chung Myung's will would endure. And as long as Mount Hua continues, Sahyung's will remains within me. Right, Sahyung? No response could be heard, but Chung Myung already knew the answer. He didn't need to regret nor long for the past. The will of Mount Hua that they risked their lives for was being guarded by Chung Myung. Simply carrying Mount Hua's name until the end, like his Sahyungs that had left before him, was enough for Chung Myung. And now, Chung Myung looked at the Sahyungs in front of him. Now, he was walking with them. Sasuk! Yes. Chung Myung smiled brightly. Now was the time to go. Back to that place he missed. A place that made him warm with just a thought. Let's return. Back to Mount Hua. Everyone nodded with a smile. At that moment, their long journey to Nanyang finally came to an end. Chapter 170. Still, I'll walk together with you. They're late. Hyunjung frowned. Coming from Nanyang, enough time had already passed to return. Sword tomb. Hyunjung sighed. Such greed. According to the Hwa Sect's message, the disciples who went to Nanyang had lately entered the tomb and come out without getting anything. Hyunjung had been informed of how dangerous the sword tomb was. Without realizing it, he had even yelled out about why the kids had to enter such a place. But after thinking about the reason those kids decided to risk entering such a dangerous place, he felt sorry instead. Sect leader. Hyun-sang looked at him and spoke. You need to rebuke the children when they return. Hyun-sang's face was slightly stiff. I'm not saying this because I'm displeased with what they decided to do. We are a sect that has nothing. The glory and honor of the past is just a memory. Now we're a sect that started again with a clean slate. Right. And for us, such children are precious. The children need to know that their safety is several times more important to us than any benefits they could earn for the sect. Hyunjung nodded his head. Let me tell them that. Eunam, who was listening to the two of them, smiled brightly. But they also need to be praised. The kids have accomplished so much this time. Right, that is true. The voice was different this time. Hyunyoung, who was depressed about the children being criticized and scolded, was excited when something good was said about them. Hyunsang smiled bitterly at this. Well, those children really did a good job. They fought with the Wudang and won. Even after entering the dangerous sword tomb, they managed to return alive and well. Since the time Hyunsang entered Mount Hua, not once had such a monumental task been taken by the sect. Although Mount Hua's conference with the Jungnam sect had spread their reputation, since it was an event that was isolated within the sect, many people didn't believe the rumors or felt they were exaggerated. In any case, it was important that the disciples who left were proudly making a name for themselves in Gangho. It was also a great achievement to be able to rebuild and help the nearly collapsed Hua Sect and preserve the legacy of Mount Hua. That piece of information was so good that Hyun-sang couldn't even bring himself to eat anything because he was so happy. Hyun-jung kept glancing at the sect. His hand, which had always been heavily resting on his lap, was fiddling around. Hyun-sang smiled. He must be happy. Why wouldn't they be happy? They weren't simply happy because of the benefits brought to the sect. It was more joyful to see Mount Hua's disciples going out into the world of their own will and making a name for themselves. Only a few years back, they were in a desperate position, nearly losing the sect and their home. Compared to that time, they were now in a state of bliss. Chung Myung has really spurred a lot of changes. There was no denying that the efforts of the other second and third class disciples played a great role. But it was Chung Myung who made the initial effort. Just as stone thrown into a calm lake creates ripples, the presence of Chung Myung caused a great ripple throughout the previously stagnant Mount Hua. Rather, it's more like a massive boulder that crashed into the pond rather than a stone thrown into a lake. The shape of the pond had changed completely. Where did Hyun-jung go? Sect leader asked us to prepare for a banquet when the children arrive, so he must be there. Ah, right. Please do that. Also, Hyun-jung is an elder. If we keep entrusting an elder with such trivial tasks, the prestige of the sect will falter. Hyun-jung looked at Hyun-sang with an absurd expression. I told the disciples to go and get it done, but he said he would do it. What am I supposed to say to stop him? Ah, that happened. He's a bit too excited to feed those kids something delicious. How could I stop that? I apologize. I didn't know. Hyun-sang was thinking of Hyun-jung and shook his head. Considering the past, when Hyun-jung seemed to be dying under the pressure of the sect's finances, he looked a lot better now. Maybe he's a bit too better. Looking at Mount Hua these days felt weird, whether it was the elders or the disciples. Well... Suddenly, Hyun-jung's eyes widened slightly. Doesn't it seem like someone's coming? Ah! Hyun-sang quickly turned his head. He also felt that someone was quickly approaching them. It does look like it. I don't know why it is that they're running so fast. Hyun-jung smiled broadly and walked ahead with a fluffy smile. It might not be considered appropriate for a sect leader to personally meet the disciples when they return. But Hyun-jung didn't care about such things. Wasn't it natural to want to openly express joy? As Hyun-jung stood in front of the Mount Hua's gate, the disciples that were passing by also began to gather around. They didn't know what was happening, but they didn't want to miss it. Hyun-jung looked at them and smiled. Now, the day has come to congratulate the disciples who achieved results for Mount Hua. Hyun-jung, who could sense the approaching disciples as they quickly reached the gate, opened his mouth to speak with a gentle smile. Come in. You have been through. Kwang! We're being attacked! Hyun-jung's warm greetings were buried in the blast of the freshly shattered gate. Looking at the ruined gate, a dim mist formed in Hyun-sang's eyes. It hasn't been long since this was built. Although the gate was smashed, a strange crowd of people could be felt rushing in. Huh? Instinctively, Hyun-sang gulped and grabbed his sword, but he soon realized that the people who entered were the disciples of Mount Hua. They were so dirty and ragged that he could not recognize them immediately. Did they go to war or something? He wondered what kind of situation the children witnessed for them to run in like this, covered in dirt, with bloodshot eyes. Unlike Hyun-sang, who was shocked, Hyun-jung calmly maintained his dignity as a sect leader and spread his arms wide as he smiled. You all worked hard. Now come. Sect leader! Chung Myung screamed as if something terrifying had happened and ran into Hyun-jung's arms. Hyun-jung smiled broadly, despite being taken aback. A disciple who was working hard to express his affection as if he was looking at his father after a long time. What kind of sect leader would say no to him? Okay. Huh? What are you doing? But it didn't take long for him to realize that something was wrong. Chung Myung, who had rushed to Hyun-jung, lifted him up and put him on his shoulders before rushing toward the sect leader's residence. What are you? Hyun-sang was shocked and tried to stop what was happening. But, what? A familiar face came into his sight. Baekchun, what are you doing? What? But without a word, Baekchun merely picked him up and started to chase after Chung Myung while carrying Hyun-sang. Eun-gum was standing there, confused and in a daze, when he suddenly realized he was also being carried on Yoon-jong's shoulder. All three of them were being taken to the sect leader's residence, and the disciples of Mount Hua were frightened as they tried to follow them, because... Shring! Shring! Jogul had his sword unsheathed and was threatening his own Sahyungs. Don't come any closer. Anyone who approaches will be cut down. Hearing Jogul's threats and seeing Yu Yi-seo support him, no one dared to move or approach. Anyone who wanted to say something quickly shut their mouth when they met Jogul's maddened eyes. What is with them? Did something go wrong? Act in moderation, please. One Chung Myung is enough. The others sighed when Jogul and Yu Yi-seo stepped back and followed the group that had already gone ahead. What are those crazy people up to now? They're even kidnapping the sect leader. Not a single person objected to the word crazy being used. This? What is this? Hyun-jong's hands trembled as they held the box. Sitting next to him was Hyun-sang and Eun-nam, who had been kidnapped by the others, and in front was Chung Myung and his party, who truly looked like beggars. I feel like I'm going to die. I might really die this time. Normally, it was basic manners for disciples to show an upright and decent appearance in front of the elders, regardless of their stress. But the children didn't have the strength to do so right now. The reason? It was quite simple. Everyone in the world looked like a thief. Damn it, I couldn't even sleep knowing that the soul vitality pill was right next to me. I almost stabbed someone for bumping my shoulder. What kind of treasure was the soul vitality pill? Within Gangho, a single pill couldn't be exchanged even for 1,000 gold. This was a pure and priceless treasure. Moreover, they didn't simply get the pill. They had the secret formula for refining it as well. Didn't they get their hands on how to make it? No matter how great the pill was, its value couldn't be compared to the method of making it. If rumors spread that Mount Hua had obtained the pill's secret formula, it wouldn't stop at just 1 or 2 people, or even sects that would attack Mount Hua with full force. In the end, the disciples began to travel in a constant state of panic, concealing that they had obtained something so valuable. The problem was that once they started the journey with such a precious treasure, even people minding their business in the distance began to look like plotting thieves. Fortunately, the items were in Chung Myung's reliable hands. If it wasn't for Chung Myung, it wouldn't have been strange for them to have stabbed a few people along the way. With such a nervous and tense atmosphere continuing over time, Mount Hua's disciples concluded that rushing to the sect as fast as possible would be better for their minds. That was why they had run non-stop all the way here. What did you say this is? Soul Vitality Pill. Soul Vitality. The Soul Vitality Pill. This is that pill. The pill with amazing effects. Yes, the Soul Vitality Pill and the secret formula. The formula. Hyun-jong was unable to think. What are these kids talking about? Yaksun? The pill that Yaksun made 200 years ago. The pill and formula for Yaksun's pill are right here. How? Just how the hell? What is this? Eun-gum was also shocked. For Hyun-jong, who didn't know anything about the connection between Yaksun and the sword tomb, this was like being struck by a bolt from the blue. No, it was like being struck by a bolt of gold. Out of nowhere, they had acquired the pill and its recipe. Check it out! Hyun-jong gulped. Click. Following the sound of the lock opening, a breathtaking scent filled the room in an instant. Oh my god! Hyun-sang and Eun-nam showed strong reactions that they normally never showed. Hyun-jong was also unable to hide his passion as he examined the contents of the box. This is really... Right when the eyes of the sect leader began to blur with tears. Cluck, You scared me. The door opened and someone walked in.
No, if you're already here, then you should have come to eat something.
Hyunyoung. He stopped talking and looked at the box in Hyunjong's hands and Chung Myung's face alternately. Then with the warmest smile in the world, he spoke.
What did you earn this time?
This quick-witted person